Welcome back. Now that you've finished the course roadmap, we're going to move into the key terms and questions presentation. As I said in the roadmap presentation, the key terms is where we're really going to start getting into the higher level areas that we're going to be dealing with all month. And so as kind of a warning, you may find you may feel like you're a little dizzy at the end of this, that you don't quite understand everything that I've talked about. That's okay. The goal of this presentation is not to have you be a master of these ideas at the very end. They're just here to help introduce them to you, because we're going to be talking about these throughout the entire 4 weeks that we have together. So we're going to be covering 4 different elements throughout this course. We're going to talk about verisimilitude, setting, culture, and language. And as I hope you'll see, all 4 of these elements are interconnected, and you really can't have one without the other. And really, in a sense, verisimilitude is king, because all of these other areas are all about creating this sense, this idea. So you may be asking yourself at this point, well, what is verisimilitude? Well, verisimilitude is the semblance of truth in a situation. It's not the actual truth, because there are some stories, some situations that are completely and absolutely untrue. Writers are liars. You know, they're moral liars. They're good liars. They're liars with a purpose, but they are liars. The world of Middle Earth, the events that happened there, that never happened. That is, in a sense, a lie. But it's a lie that gives comfort and meaning and joy to a lot of people, so it's a good lie. And the reason why it's a good lie, and the reason why it captures people's imagination so readily, is because it feels true. Tolkien did a fabulous job of adding in all of these minor and major details that made Middle-earth feel like a real living, breathing place with its own history and life and culture and everything else. And that's why people come back to it again and again and again. I mean, for God's sakes, the man had 120 pages on just what it meant to be a hobbit in Fellowship of the Rings. There's a reason why he's considered to be a master world builder. Now, verisimilitude is important not just in works of fantasy or science fiction. Verisimilitude is vital to any story that you're telling. You may have a story set in present-day New York City, but if it doesn't feel real, if you don't have those little important details that make it come alive and make it feel like New York City, then you're going to lose your reader. You know, at best, you're going to have readers from New York who are going to laugh at your work and may continue to read just for the inaccuracies. Or the worst case scenario is that they're going to laugh at your work and then they're going to put it down and read something else. And so creating this real world, this world that feels real and true, is incredibly important in your work. And that's what we're going to be talking about again and again and again all throughout this month. If it helps, think of the Stephen Colbert term truthiness, where it's something that feels true even if it's not. We're looking at the truthiness of your world. So this brings us to our second key term, which is setting. Now, setting, as we touched upon in the course roadmap, is the temporal and spatial environment where your story takes place. Basically, the when and the where. And so understanding this is very important. However, setting is also probably one of the most underutilized and misunderstood of the Aristotelian elements of fiction. So much detail, so much emphasis is put on plot and character and theme that setting is often forgotten. And this is not good. This is a tragedy in some sense because setting is incredibly important for drawing your reader in, for making this world feel real. It can also be used to enhance all of those other elements. You can use setting to help portray character, to help convey character, to help create character. The setting can become an antagonist. The setting can be used to foreshadow. The setting can be used to signal the climax or to create mood and tension. You can use setting for so many different areas, and we're actually going to be talking more about that in a keynote later on this week. But for now, just know that you can get a lot out of setting. That setting can be used for a great many effects, and that you are really undermining yourself if you don't utilize it to your full potential. So our third key term is culture. And this one's kind of complicated. Culture is not necessarily something that can be summed up neatly and tidily and wrapped up in a nice little bow, not like setting or verisimilitude. There are so many different elements that go into what creates culture that really we're just touching on the surface here. And we're going to come up with a working definition that's good for this class and that's useful for you in your writing. But know that culture is a much more fluid and dynamic and complicated process than I'm making it out to be. So culture can be seen as the intersection of 5 different elements. The first off is environment. Where do these people live? What's their land like? What is the weather like? Are they close to water? Are they, is it close to farmable land? Is it a big city? Is it a small town? Is it isolated? Is it open? All of these elements in the environment are going to affect how the people live and how they approach life. I also have language. When language is kind of getting double duty here because we're going to talk about language by itself in a minute. But in this case, we're also talking about language in terms of just as being a key component of culture. So how do these people communicate? What is the language that they speak? How many languages do they speak? Are there any particular gestures, facial expressions, signs, symbols that are unique to that culture that either have a different meaning outside of it or don't have a meaning at all? Hierarchy is very important. Hierarchy is basically who has power and why does that person have power? Is it a meritocracy? Is it based on who is the best for the job? So the culture has all of these different contests and tests and basically sanctioned arenas for people to prove themselves mentally, physically, morally, whatever. Or, to quote Jackson Brown, is power and position equated with the grace of God? Is it a world ruled by the priests and the nobles, the people who are associated with the gods and the goddesses, with heaven? And if so, then that is going to affect not just who has power, but who can attain power. In a meritocracy, power is earned. You have these sanctioned events, these sanctioned arenas where people can prove their worth, I should say. In a more religious connotation, there is no social movement. There is no fluidity. You are born into this world. You're born into this position, and there's no moving up, and there's really no moving down. Which, if you're a king or a priest, it's a pretty sweet deal. If you are, however, in the 99%, if you're a serf or, God help you, a slave or an artisan, you really have no recourse. You are born into a life of drudgery and toil, and you will die in that life as well. Not a cheery thought, I know. Another key element is law. What is permitted and what is taboo? Now, in this case, we're talking more about law as created and enforced by the state. And so there is a code of conduct that is created by the government and is enforced with clearly posted rules. And so if you break rules, you may face corporal or martial punishment. You may even face death. Now, there are also softer laws, laws that are associated more with just how one conducts him or herself in polite society. So, you don't wear white after Labor Day. You don't wear a brown belt with black shoes. You don't slurp your soup. Things like that. If you break those laws, there's no corporal punishment. You're not going to go to soup jail or anything like that. But you do face ostracization. You do face strictures placed against you by the community. You could be, if you do it enough, you could become an outcast. Nobody wants to be around you, which is punishment in and of itself. Finally, we have religion. Religion is a sticky subject to talk about because obviously religion plays an incredibly important role in many people's lives. Now, for the sake of this class, we are going to approach it as if we were anthropologists or sociologists. And so we're looking at it as a belief system, as guiding stories that help give a community purpose and gives it a direction. It helps you understand who you are, your place in the world, and what you have to do to ensure a good life and a good afterlife. So these elements inform each other and they cannot be separated. Environment will dictate in some sense the law. If you are living in a harsh environment, a land where food and resources are scarce, theft may be the penalty for theft may be much higher in a place where we have plenty to eat, plenty of land, plenty of goods. In a world where these necessities are scarce, the punishment for stealing will be much greater. Language is going to affect law and vice versa. There are some things that you just don't say in polite society. There are some things you don't say in front of kings and judges and people like that. Language is also affected by the environment. In Egypt, for example, there's a word called the kamsin, which translates roughly to 50. And it refers to sandstorms that occur about 50 times a year in that region. We don't have that word. We don't really have a word that means the same thing in our language because we don't experience that in our own environment. Hierarchy will determine how you speak to other people. As I said before, you don't speak to the king in the same way that you would your pal. And so all of these are interconnected, and we are viewing culture as kind of the nexus where all of these different elements intersect. And so hopefully understanding this will help you better understand the culture that you're writing about in your story. So let's return to language. Now, language, like culture, is a fluid, sticky phenomenon. It can be difficult to talk about, and certainly whole people have dedicated careers just studying language, and so in some sense I feel like we're doing a bit of a disservice boiling it down to such a small, narrow focus, but considering the time restraints and the fact that we are covering a lot of different ideas here, it's kind of a necessary evil. So we can break language down into different elements. You have oral language, the words that you speak right now, the words that I speak right now, I should say. What I'm doing right now is I am stringing together packets of sounds called phonemes. Now, a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that can carry meaning. And so when I string them together, I am forming words, and words have meaning. There are sounds that have meaning. There are sounds that refer to something else. And so when I say the word rock, for example, it's going to make you think of a rock. And so a word, in a sense, is something that stands in for something else. It's a concept that stands in for a thing. And the amazing thing about language, the amazing thing about words, whether they're oral or written, is that we can, through language, understand things that we have no direct experience with. You know, I've never seen nor experienced a black hole, but thanks to language, I have an idea of what the concept is, and I can imagine it, and I can get an idea of what this phenomenon is, and that's an amazing thing. So all cultures start out as oral cultures. Writing is an invention. Writing is a technology, and it's probably one of the most important technologies that we have ever created as a species, which segues into written communication. Now, written communication is, you have many different types, but at its basic form, it is a symbol, it is a mark that is used to stand in for an idea or a sound or a person or place or thing, a noun, you know. And so, for example, I have the word written here. It starts out with the letter W, which is a visual sign representing the sound W. And so when you spread it out, written, you get the word written, which means something that has been wrote down. And so it's one of those things where the more I talk about it, because when I start talking about this and I start thinking about the words that I use, I start hanging myself up a little bit, because at this point in all of our lives, we have internalized all of these different rules for oral and written communication, and we don't think about it anymore. I don't think about the words that I'm forming in my mouth. I don't think about the concepts, because for me, word and concept are one and the same, and so I can convey these ideas with a certain level of speed and accuracy until I actually think about it. It's like when you say a word 100 times in a row and all of a sudden it just doesn't sound right anymore because you're thinking about it and you're, in a sense, disassociating those sounds with the concept that it's supposed to represent. You also have symbolic communication, which is related to written in that it is a visual form, but in the terms of symbology, the level to which the visual form is divorced from its referent, it can be abstract or clear. Like, you can have a picture of a rock and you know what that means. Or you can have a picture of the sun and you know what that means. Or you could just draw a circle with lines radiating out of it. And for the most part, as long as we, as a culture, have kind of decided that's what the sun looks like, we understand that that's what the sun means as well. But you can take that a step further. You know, we often in Western culture associate light and fire with knowledge and passion. And so the sun can be the symbol of learning, of knowledge, of all kinds of different things. And so the further you step back, the greater the, how do I want to say this? The greater the length there can be between, the greater the distance there can be between a symbol and what it refers to. And that's exciting and interesting, and that gives you a lot of room to play with as a writer. But it also introduces a lot more uncertainty and potential confusion. You know, there is, at one time in Great Britain, they were putting up, around the time when everybody was really starting to drive, you know, had motor cars, they started putting up signs around school zones. And so the sign was a pyramid, or a triangle, I should say, with a torch on it. And the reason that they chose the torch is they were hearkening back to the Greek ideal of knowledge as being enlightening, shedding light on something. And so a torch, since it's something that sheds light and heat, was associated with this idea of illumination. You're tying in knowledge with sight, and so the more knowledge you have, the more you see. And of course, with the torch, the more light it throws off, the more you see as well. So as you can see, it's kind of a weird, tenuous connection, and as a sign, it did not work very well. A lot of people did not understand what that sign meant, and unfortunately, it led to some tragedies. And so they changed that sign to the one that we know now, which is that yellow sign with the two silhouetted children walking across the street. And so, that is a much clearer sign. That's one that's much more understandable to people at a glance. You don't have to take that extra step to think about it. And so symbolic communication is powerful, but it can be confusing at times, I suppose, is what I want to say. So finally, we also come to gesticular, the gestures that we use. We can extrapolate this, expand this to talk about body language and facial expressions. If I were seeing you and I had my arms crossed and I had kind of a sneer on my mouth and I said, nice shirt. You know exactly that I do not mean nice shirt. I mean that shirt is god-awful, and it makes me want to pluck out my eyes. But if I'm smiling, if my body language is more open, and I say, oh, that's a nice shirt, that tells a lot. There's so much more to communication than just the words. There's voice inflection, there's facial expressions, body language. All of these things have meaning, and we're going to talk about that more in week 3. So I don't want to bombard you with too much. I kind of probably talked a little bit too much, but I get excited talking about this, and I think it's a lot of fun, and it's really interesting, and so I hope you did too. If you have any questions, as always, contact me. Send me an email. Send me an instant message. Call me. I want to make sure that you understand this. Or even if you don't have any questions, you just want to talk more about it, that's perfectly fine as well. I mean, that's what I'm here for. So I will talk to you later, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.